Welcome back to Unburied, where we put ROI in your favor. And today we're going to mix it up a little bit because it's Sunday. And as you see me talking about God all the time, I figured, why not have at least one day a week where we drop an episode that's built on practical application. Not that you couldn't practically apply what you're hearing in other episodes, but what I'm getting at is a lot of times when we read the word, we don't read it for a return on investment. In other words, we're spending time on it, right? And, you'll hear me on this podcast talk a lot about ROI. And inside of that, there is a different kind of ROI. And you'll hear that in an upcoming episode. But I'll just give you a little teaser here. Instead of just return on investment, what's in it for me? I asked the question like, well, what's the ROI for God? What's the return on investment for Him? And what I came up with was it's actually what is God's righteous original intent? That's what came up for me. So as you hear this episode, I'm going to call this the Walk and Talk series. So don't worry about looking at the screen if you're watching it on Spotify or you're watching on YouTube. Literally put the headphones in, go take a walk. And we're just going to talk through part of Genesis 1 where he talks about making man in our image, and he gives them the first mandate. And I'm going to break that mandate down in this episode so that you can start thinking about it the way God intended it in his righteous original intent versus the way the world's probably taught you to do it backwards, which is what I found myself doing, and I see a ton of other people doing until we realize, like, hey, we're doing it the world's way, we're doing it backwards. And in reality, it doesn't have to be that way because that's not the way that God originally intended it. So this is a walk and talk. Grab your earbuds, grab your earphones, or get in your comfy chair, get on your treadmill, however you like to do a walk and talk, and let's dig into it. What if I told you that most Christians and most Christian entrepreneurs are running God's first mandate to humanity completely backwards? Like they're trying to have something so they can do something so they can finally be somebody. You ever felt like that? But God gave it to us in reverse order. Be, then do, then have. And when you get that order right, everything changes. So let's walk and talk about it. Here's what God actually said. Open up your Bible to Genesis 1, starting at verse 24. This is the sixth day of creation. God's been building the earth, forming the seas, creating the vegetation, the animals, the whole ecosystem. And then he does something different in verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness to rule over the fish of the sea and of the birds of the air and of the livestock and of all the earth itself and every creature that crawls upon it. Notice the order here. God doesn't say, let us make man so that later, if he proves himself, if he works hard enough, if he earns it, maybe he can reflect our image. No. First, God says who man is in our image after our likeness. That's the B. Identity first, not achievement first, not performance first. Identity. Then look at verse 28. After establishing who we are, God tells us what to do. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth. That's the do. Authority, dominion, purpose, assignment. But notice, the do flows from the be. He doesn't say rule the earth so you can become my image bearer. He says you are my image bearer, therefore rule. And then verse 29. Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of all the earth, every tree whose fruit contains seed. They will be yours for food. Let's pause here a second because that's an interesting one. So it seems in the beginning that all mankind were vegetarians. Like that's how we were originally made. And I feel like, at some point, someday, that's what we're all going to get back to. Which, it kind of bites, if you love steak and burgers and chicken and fish and all that good stuff. But anyways, In the beginning, that's the way it was. Like, you didn't have to kill anything to eat. That's the have. Provision, resources, abundance. But the have comes after the be and the do. So here's the order God gave us on day 6. Be his image, do his will, have his provision. In that exact order. And every time we reverse it, we end up buried. So how is it that we reverse it? Like, what's that all about? Well, let's go deeper. We're on a walk and talk. Let's just be real. Here's what most of us do, especially as Christian entrepreneurs. We wake up every day trying to have something. We want to have more money, have more clients, have more success, have more influence, have more respect for others, have the lifestyle we see on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, TikTok. And we think if I can just have enough, then I can do the things that matter. If I can just get to 6 figures, then I'll have time for my family. And that's like so 1999. Like it should be if I could get to multiple 6 figures. If I could just build this business, then I'll be generous. If I can just get out of debt, then I'll be present. But it never works that way, does it? Because you're trying to have before doing. And even if you succeed, even if you get the money, the business, the success, you still don't feel like you're anybody. You're still performing, still proving, still hustling to earn an identity you're trying to have instead of stewarding an identity God already gave you. You're running the mandate backwards. And we've all done this. You're trying to have so that then you can do, so you can finally be. But God said, be, then do, then have. It's like we got it backwards. And that's why so many Christian entrepreneurs are profitable, but buried and not present. They're making money, but they're not at peace. They're providing, but they're not present. They're building, but they're not being. Now, I've pondered this for a long time. And it's wild. I was like, well, why is it that way? And it's because they never anchored in the be in the first place. Like, if we're going to walk in this new kingdom, this new concept of the kingdom, we have to understand this be, do, have order that was laid out in the book of Genesis. Getting the order right is kind of important. And when you start to put this into place, you'll start to see how things just start to fall into place. So how do we get this right? How do we live out God's first mandate the way he designed it? Well, first we have to anchor in the be. You're made in God's image. Believe it. Not because you earned it, not because you hustled for it, not because you performed well enough to deserve it, because God said so. Now, we're talking about way back in the beginning in the book of Genesis here in this particular walk and talk. And pretty high probability that if you're watching this, you already believe in Jesus. And Jesus has already paid the price. Adam, if you keep reading Genesis 2 and 3, you find out Adam's kicked out of the garden, right? He loses his contact with God. And then Jesus returns that as the second Adam. So it's important to understand the frame when you're looking in the Old Testament that you don't get lost in, oh, wait a minute. That's just what it was for them during that time. And it's like, well, nothing's really changed except for the fact that, man became sinful and then man was forgiven. And then all he's got to do is receive that gift of God and he can be back in right standing. When I say because God said so, I'm referring to verse 27 where he says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So he created the man out of the dirt. And he created the woman out of the man. It's very interesting. You can read about that in chapter 2. And if you notice, that's not conditional. That's not based on your performance. That's your identity. Like, it's literally the identity that we were all given as image bearers of God. You are an image bearer of God. And that's who you are before you do anything, before you build anything, and before you achieve anything. And here's what changes when you anchor there. You stop trying to prove you're worthy. You stop hustling for validation. You stop performing for approval because you already are who God made you to be. And we take that a step further in the New Testament. You already are who God made you to be in Christ. Because now when God looks at you, he sees Christ. He doesn't see you. He sees Christ in you. So how do we operate in the do? We got the be piece down of identity. How do we operate in the do? Well, once you're anchored in who you are, now that you can step into what you're called to do. Verse 28 again, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth. This is dominion. This is stewardship. This is authority. But notice, it's not a hustle. It's not a grind. It's an assignment that flows from your identity. You're not trying to become somebody by doing stuff. You're doing stuff because you already are somebody. And when you steward your business from this place, you make offers without guilt because you're stewarding resources, not hustling for worth. You're leading your family without anxiety because you're operating in authority that God's already gave you. You make decisions with clarity because you're not trying to prove anything. You just steward. You're just stewarding what's yours to steward. That's the do, flowing from the be. So we have the identity and the being. We have the do flowing from it. And now we have the third piece, receive the have. And this is where it gets interesting. So when you be who God made you and do what God called you to do, then verse 29 comes in. Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. They will be yours for food. God provides. Not because you earned it again, not because you hustled hard enough. Because stewards who operate in their identity and calling get provision. The have is the result of the be and the do. It's not the starting point, it's the fruit. And here's what's wild. Verse 31 says, and God looked upon all that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Not pretty good, not good enough, very good. I'm going to pause for a second on that because it's interesting when you read the account of the first 5 days. At the end, he just says it was good. But on this one, when he made his image bearers, you and me, he said it was very good. That's pretty cool. And why is it very good? Why is this first mandate so important? Because when you live in the right order, be, then do, then have, everything aligns. You're not buried under chaos. You're stewarding from rest. You're building from peace. You're living the unburied life. Living the unburied life. And the only way you can live the unburied life is to do it God's way. And he's telling you right here, like, this is how you do it. Now, of course, this is the beginning. Don't go misconstruing what I'm saying and don't go saying what I'm not saying. Like, obviously, we all know that, we have to come through Christ to step back into this because we lost this mandate a long time ago. Christ gave us access back to it. So what does this mean for you on our walk and talk today? So let me ask you, what order are you running? Are you trying to have something so that you can do something so that you can finally be somebody? Or are you anchored in who you are, doing what you're called to do, and trusting God to provide? Because here's what I see all the time. Christian entrepreneurs who are making great money, but they're exhausted. They're providing for their families, but they're not present. They're building something impressive, but they don't know who they are. And why is that? Because they're running the mandate backwards. They're trying to have their way into an identity instead of stewarding from an identity that God's already gave them. And here's the truth. You don't need to have more to be somebody. You already are somebody. Let me pause on that a minute. I find it interesting when we look at John the Baptist. He was the guy that came to make way for the Lord. He was a wild man. He lived out in the country. He ate locusts and honey, and that's it. Think about that. Who was he being? What was he doing? And what was he having? Well, he was being born for a purpose, raised up and taught exactly what that purpose was. He was doing exactly what he's supposed to have been doing, preparing the way for the Lord. And in that, he got to have freedom from the governing authorities, and he got to eat a lot of locusts and honey. And ultimately, he did his job, he fulfilled his purpose, and he paid the ultimate price. But I find it interesting that later in the scriptures, Jesus talks about Matthew 11:11. Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Powerful statement. So here's the truth. You don't need to have to be somebody. You already are somebody. You're made in the image of God. You're called to steward what he's given you. When you do that, when you be first and then do and then have, the provision comes. Not from your hustle, not from your performance, from your stewardship. In other words, you managed it well. So this week, I want you to ask yourself one question. Am I operating from be, or am I trying to have my way to be? Because if you're trying to have your way there, you're going to stay buried. But if you anchor in the be first, everything changes. You stop performing, you start being, you stop hustling for worth, and you start stewarding from worth. And that's the first mandate. That's how God designed it from day 6. So that's this week's Walk and Talk. I hope that landed for you the way it landed for me when I first saw this pattern in Genesis. Be, do, have, in that order. Not the other way around. If you're a Christian parent, entrepreneur who's been running it backwards, trying to have so you can do, so you can finally be, I want to invite you to stop. Anchor in who God made you first, and then steward from that place. And just watch what happens. Watch what he does. Because this is the way he set things up to operate. I'll see you next Sunday for another Walk and Talk. Till then, remember to be, do, and then have. And that is the process that will help you stay in the unburied life. See you next week.